Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It was all going to plan. The EDF board had voted to back the Hinkley nuclear project, and then, late last night, everything was thrown into doubt. The government will delay their decision until the autumn. Thousands of jobs could now be at risk, a move the unions say is bewildering and bonkers. Number 10 says it's perfectly reasonable to revisit the deal. So what will it mean for our post-Brexit trade negotiations? And is Britain still open for business? Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has this.
It should have been champagne, photo calls and glad handing. Instead, the dawn of a new era in energy policy in the UK was overshadowed by political chaos and uncertainty. Perhaps it's July, not April, that's the cruelest month, because surely this is an industrial wasteland. And while the local communities are still reverberating about the government's last-minute intervention, the rest of the world will be asking what this decision means for the whole concept of Britain remaining open for business. The Prime Minister is thought to have wanted more time to look closely at the £18 billion Hinkley project. But the decision to yank the signing of the deal just hours before the EDF chief executive was set to arrive in Somerset has left Britain's trade partners, France and China, feeling very bruised. The U-turn was described today as bonkers by the GMB union and chaos by Labour.
It's now clear that at the last minute, when they've already said to people that they were going to sign this today, that they've had a rethink. I welcome that, but I do think it makes us look completely chaotic for investors in this country.
Mace, a key building firm in charge of contracts at Hinkley Point, described the delay as pushing the construction industry into a government-induced recession.
Once again, we have another delay to a vital decision in terms of our future energy security and infrastructure. We are going to have a looming energy gap if we don't make these decisions now in terms of our energy security into the 2030s.
Last night, despite 10 years of preparatory work and the final EDF board vote agreeing investment, the government's new business minister said it would have to consider carefully all the component parts of this project and make its decision in the early autumn. The big question is why the government made its decision to pause the deal so last minute. Right up until Wednesday, those inside Treasury were convinced the deal would be signed. But sources say, unlike his predecessor George Osborne, Philip Hammond will be leaving this infrastructure project to the Prime Minister. Insiders at EDF told Channel 4 News this was a geopolitical issue, not a company-related matter, batting away the idea that this could spark a renegotiation of the controversial energy costs. Another idea doing the rounds is, given the French government's keenness for an EDF deal, that Mrs May is looking at using it as a negotiating tool, while others still think this is tied to the long-bubbling concerns about Hinkley being a one-third Chinese deal. In a column written just last year, Mrs May's confidant and chief of staff, Nick Timothy, wrote,
"Security experts are worried that the Chinese could use their role to build weaknesses into computer systems, which will allow them to shut down Britain's energy production at will."
The former Business Secretary Sir Vince Cable has suggested the government's decision to delay signing up to a new nuclear power station in Somerset is due to the Prime Minister's reluctance to involve China in the project. Sir Vince said Theresa May during the coalition years was unhappy with what he described as the gung-ho approach to Chinese investment adopted by the former Chancellor George Osborne. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
The ground, quite literally, had been cleared, but politically there's now a lot of work to be done before a new nuclear power station is built at Hinkley. The French company EDF may have moved heaven and earth to reach a relatively quick decision, but the precise reason for the prime ministerial pause still isn't known. Today, for the first time, someone who sat round the cabinet table with Theresa May gave us his insight.
Certainly when we were in government, Theresa May was, I think, quite clear she was unhappy about the rather gung-ho approach to Chinese investment that we had and that George Osborne in particular was promoting, and as I recall, raised objections to Hinkley at that time. I think we've got a different Prime Minister with a different set of priorities, and projects of this kind are going to be looked at through a different filter.
There could be other reasons too. The £18 billion price tag would make Hinkley the world's most expensive power station, and the guaranteed price we'd pay for its electricity is twice the going rate. The previous occupant of number 11 Downing Street was very keen that Hinkley went ahead, but as one government voice put it, don't underestimate the antipathy that Theresa May feels towards George Osborne. Now her officials in there say, look, she just needs a little bit of time to look over the detail. But the Prime Ministerial pause has opened up new questions about the project's viability and reopened every aspect of it to political scrutiny. And the Labour leader welcomes the debate.
The headline figures are very disturbing on the price, the prices of electricity that's going to be generated, the risk to the British taxpayer of the whole thing, and of course the fact that we're handing over large areas of our energy generation to the French and Chinese to control. I think we need to have some serious discussions, and we'll be having them.
Some business voices are now calling for a quick clarification that other major infrastructure projects, such as HS2, won't be sidetracked, and that airport expansion is clearly on Number 10's radar. The government says the future of new nuclear capacity isn't up in the air, but it's not clear that Hinkley will go ahead in the way that the previous administration imagined. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Whatever the reason for the pause, and whether you think Hinkley Point is the right energy policy or not, in a post-Brexit world, it betrays the uncomfortable truth about Britain's precarious economy. Back in Somerset, there may be room for 1,300 swimming pools, but for now, everything is standing still.
Well, we're joined now by the economist and critic of the Hinkley project, Anne Pettifor, and Gary Graham, Deputy General Secretary of the Prospect Union, which represents managers and specialists in the energy sector, and from Hinkley Point itself, the local Conservative MP, Ian Liddell-Grainger. Mr. Liddell-Grainger, let me start with you. Just a couple of weeks ago, you wrote, "We can put aside all doubt. It will definitely proceed." Just last night, on this very programme, you said, "I have no doubt we're going to deliver." I'm assuming you'd admit to doubts aplenty now.
No, not in the slightest. I think the Prime Minister's made it very clear she wants to look at this. It makes no change. And in your piece, you said everything's standing still here. That's absolute rubbish. The diggers have been working today. They spent £2.5 billion on this already. There's nearly 1,000 people behind me working on the land reclamation, which they said they would do. No, I've absolutely no doubts about it.
OK, but that's the problem, isn't it?
I think the Prime Minister has every right to check it.
OK, but work's going ahead, but there's absolutely no guarantee that it will happen now, is there?
Of course there are. It's absolute rubbish again. Of course it's going to happen. The Prime Minister wants to look at this. It's a 90,000-page submission that was put in by the company. We spent 9.5 years on this. She spent 2 weeks. And before you say, well, she sat at the cabinet table, yes, she did. But Amber Rudd was responsible. And the first Secretary of State I dealt with over this was Ed Miliband.
Well, let me turn now to Gary Graham. I mean, do you have doubts that the whole thing might be called off now? Do you think that's possible?
Well, listen, I wish I shared Ian's confidence, but it's clear there is no plan B. We are passionately committed to the building of Hinkley Point C as part of a balanced energy policy for the UK. I think the arguments for its build are compelling and haven't changed. I am surprised and disappointed by the announcement of the review. I struggle to understand that ministers...
Well, it's quite clear, isn't it, that Number 10 balked at the cost. I mean, it was going to cost an extra £230 a year per household on average.
Well, I think when you look at that figure, and if you compare it to the spot rates of energy prices at the moment, the point that hasn't been made is why we're not building new generating capacity is because spot energy prices are where they are at the moment.
Well, Ian, you were shaking your head at that point on the cost. I mean, the cost and the security concerns could put paid to this whole deal, couldn't they? Ian Liddell-Grainger, you were shaking your head at concerns about the cost there, the extra cost to the householder.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We've got quite a lot of wind out here. I do apologise to your viewers for that. No, it's not that. It's what I was actually just sort of shaking my head on was that you know, this is government dithering. It's not government dithering, government checking. The ultimate responsibility of the Prime Minister is to make the right decision on behalf of the country.
OK, but it's government mess, isn't it?
Doing.
Sorry to interrupt, but it is... I know you've got a lot of wind your end, but government mess, isn't it? I mean, the Chancellor, you were in the dark, the Chancellor was in the dark too. I mean, he said, we have to make sure the project goes ahead, just very recently.
Absolutely, but I think the Chancellor quite rightly knew a little bit more about it because he was Defence Secretary, and that's understandable. The Prime Minister has been Home Secretary for nearly 6 years. She has concentrated on that and has been a very good Home Secretary. I think all we agree with that. And she wants to make sure in her own mind this is right. I've already spoken to Greg Clark. He couldn't have been more helpful and straightforward. We're seeing if we can get him down here fairly soon to talk to the team down here. He knows how good this project is, and I agree with the unions. It should, must and will happen.
OK, Anne Pettifor.
Yes. Well, whatever you may think about the virtues of the project in nuclear power terms or in job terms, in financing terms, it is deeply, deeply flawed. And I really congratulate the Prime Minister for calling this aside at this stage in order to review it, because the financing of it is almost crazy, actually. We are here, we have governments, foreign governments, with majority stakes in this project, and the British government and the British people have no real stake in it, but they have a massive liability for it. And that is bizarre and unprecedented. And the fact is that the British government is able to raise the financing for it very easily, as we saw this week, when it issued a 50-year gilt issue auction, and for £2.5 billion, and £10 billion was bid for this. In other words, there's a lot of money wanting to be parked somewhere in a British project with British dividends and British returns, so that the British taxpayer gets something from this rather than Chinese or French taxpayers.
Right, Gary Graham, this is deeply flawed, this project.
I don't think it is. I think the arguments for a new build at Hinkley are absolutely compelling. It's going to provide 7% of electricity for the UK
between the argument
over the next
build
65
and the financing
years.
of it, Graham. That's the difference.
Well, let's just quote a particular point in the financing. The price that the government has guaranteed for energy produced by Hinkley is double the going rate for electricity. That sounds a bit crazy.
It may be double the going rate, but that's precisely why there is no new build of generating capacity of any significance in the UK at the moment. The position is unsustainable. If we want to secure a future, if we want to secure our energy needs, if we want to transition to low carbon, we have to build Hinkley.
I think I quite agree with that. The government needs to do this. The question is, the private sector wants to do this.
Crazy.
No, the financing of it is crazy. The government wants to do it and should do it and finance it. The private sector doesn't want to take the risk of financing this, and it wants to have the risk guaranteed. Well, that's not free market economics, Kathy. That is Soviet-style economics, and the French government and the Chinese government are demanding Soviet-style funding for this, and we're playing ball, and that's crazy.
Ian Liddell-Grainger, leave aside the cost for a minute. What about the security point? And that quote from Theresa May's aide, Nick Timothy, talking about the Chinese possibly using their role to build weaknesses into computer systems, which will allow them to shut down Britain's energy production. That is a concern, isn't it?
Well, they might be able to do that elsewhere, but they certainly can't do it at Hinkley because they're not going to have any say in the matter. They're investors not building it. Are you actually suggesting to me that Huawei, which is doing the infrastructure for BT, should rip it all up and take it away? That's going to shut down Whitehall and hospitals.
Do you worry, though?
Come on. Timothy wrote an article 6 months ago, which he was arguing cybersecurity is massively important. Yes, it is. But I'm not sure that just the Chinese. There are a lot of other countries I don't particularly trust, but I can assure you from the point of view of Hinkley C, and if you look through the submission, you will find it in there. This computer system, the systems run here, are controlled, run, managed and built by EDF Energy, not by the Chinese.
But the point is that EDF Energy is owned by a foreign government, effectively. I mean, the British people and the British government are not in control of this project. And there will be security issues. Come on, we've just lived through an enormous crisis in Japan.
I don't know which planet are you living on?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm living on the planet...
I mean, honestly, you're living...
Let her speak.
No, you're not.
Answer that question.
I'm living on the planet... I'm living on the planet the Japanese are living on.
David Bowie.
I'm living on the planet
No, you're not. You're just...
I'm sorry...
Can you just let her speak,
If you're an economist, I'm really sad. It's very sad.
Let's just let her finish her point. You're on the planet Japanese.
I'm living on the planet the Japanese are living on, where there's been a major crisis of their whole nuclear system. So we have to think about security issues for this. Well,
no.
Gary Graham,
what
you
happened in
worried
Japan would not happen here.
If I could make the point, I think some special advisors have perhaps read too many John le Carré novels. My understanding is that the Chinese want to build this in the United Kingdom because we've got the most highly regulated safety environment in the world. They want to prove their expertise, they want to prove their technology and use this as a leaping off pad into the rest of Europe.
I'm afraid we've got to end it there. Gary Graham, Anne Pettifor and Ian Liddell-Grainger, thank you very much for joining me.
I've been getting away with it all my